The player arrives at a harbor in the slums of the lower district of the city, a place that coincides with the sort of underdog position the player character is supposed to be at the beginning of the game. The player was born in the city but has lived elsewhere for her entire life and has now returned back. As an absolute monarchy, the society is divided in social classes, which will be clearly visible throughout the level. This is important because of the journey the player will make from a rogue underdog to celebrated hero of the realm. The player has a companion, this is important, native to the city. I imagine that the game would be played by several players in a co-op mode, replaying the game and levels, switching between different characters, etc. A sewer drain is visible on the right, the first of many foreshadowings. The level is set at the end of the game for dramatic reasons. The mission is to stop an overthrow of the government, a coup d'etat, that is ongoing primarily at the palace. The city is currently in a state of celebration due to a public holiday, so the streets would be crowded and the city guard somewhat occupied. The player sneaks past the guards in the harbor area, which is meant to give the player a feel of what much of the level is about. They then proceed to a tavern where they would spend some time, and suspense would build up as the characters talk about their coming mission. The path forward continues up to the roof, where the first signs of the hierarchical society is shown. The platform leads up to a vantage point, looking out over the city. There is much to be seen. This functions as an establishing shot where the player can linger and observe the city. The player carries binoculars, which can come in handy should the player choose to use them. The lower district is filled with patrolling guards who check the trucks heading to town with goods for the celebration that is ongoing in the city. This is a potential way past the checkpoints which the player can use, provided that the player figures this out. High status or high priority persons are flown from and to the palace in airships. The player turns around in a bait and switch to continue forward. It is possible to sneak past the guards' outposts due to the advantage of height. Those who miss the opportunity of sneaking aboard the trucks or those who decide to sneak through the district will encounter patrolling guards, so stealth will be necessary. Though the player is equipped with sword and rifle, attacking multiple guards this early in the level would result in high alert, causing the city guard to double their watch, hence making reaching the palace impossible, i.e. game over. Later in the level, the player will be forced down into the sewers, which are foreshadowed here in the lower district. A dialogue between the characters would give the player the information that the sewers should or must be avoided at every cost. Here is a good first example of one of the places where the level could need more work. The player is exposed, guards are patrolling on multiple fronts, therefore it is impossible for the player to keep an eye on every direction. More covers would have been good, and perhaps a more back alley sort of classic stealth approach layout. I raised the buildings on stone foundations, which partly helped to solve this, but at the same time started the idea that the level should be more vertical, which is something I will discuss later in the video. Apart from attentive awareness and subterfuge, hearing as a sense comes into play. As the player progresses through the lower district, music can be heard coming from somewhere. The concept of findability is applied. The player should try to locate where the music is coming from. The harbor, as well as the lower district, is dark and gloomy, which makes the music stand out in a way that is meant to attract the player. The music intensifies gradually the closer the player comes to the source. Now the music can be heard clearly. The music is emanating from a tavern up ahead. The checkpoints ahead are well guarded, and there is no way forward on ground level. The tavern is also filled to the brim with guards, and the player would be forced into this alley. If the player is unsure of where to go next, there are hints. Firstly, the old car in the garage that is someone is trying to start. The car's flashlights are blinking in the same direction as the player is supposed to go. Secondly, one of the car's tires rolls away from the mechanic as the car starts. Movement is a good way to attract attention and lead the player in the right or wrong direction. Once the player figures out the way up to the roof, a new chapter begins. To combat both visual and gameplay fatigue, the level takes to new heights as the player scales up to the city rooftops, and a new gameplay beat begins. Here it was my wish to give the player a sense of security as a direct contrast to the stress of the guards at ground level. Atop the city rooftops, there are no guards, hence a high prospect and refuge is experienced. The player is now in a strong position high above the city guards. From a vantage point just up ahead, the player can stop and look, breathe, and relax as a vista of the upper district is presented. Birds swoosh by and fly in the direction of the climbable vines to the right. The birds dive down into the player's view and then turn drastically upwards towards the sky. I once again employ movement to attract the eye of the player and hint to the player's path forward. With more time to this project, I would have given the player multiple choices of paths ahead. There are stairs and houses to the left, a lift at the truck stop below, stairs to the right, and vines on the wall, which could all be possible ways to proceed. I chose to focus on the vines to the right. The player will know from previous experiences in the game that vines growing on walls are climbable. The player climbs the vines to dramatic heights. A fall from this height is certain death. Music can once again be heard, music that also reflects the new district the player just entered. The fact that nobody takes notice of the player character as she enters the apartment is symbolic of the society's inability to see what is going on around them. Another vista is presented, this time an even better view of the upper district, and yet another chance to pace out the way forward. Here I would have wanted a lot of player agency, giving the player multiple choices of ways forward. Walk down to the street and blend into the celebrating crowd like Altair, steal a car like CJ, or start some sort of commotion to lure away the guards Agent 47 style. I chose to focus on the Corvo Attano-esque sneaky ledge walk. As the player is closing in on the palace, tension rises. Not all guards are on duty. The player faces an apartment with off-duty city watchmen who would not hesitate to sound the alarm if seeing a stranger scaling the outside of the upper district homes. This is another example, however, of where the level needs more work. This ledge walk was supposed to be a sort of puzzle challenge where the enemy movement had to be studied and understood in order to progress. This bank or town hall was meant to be a stealth heavy indoors segment with much focus on discoverability. I wanted the player to have to look for the way forward by sneaking from room to room. This could also be a good opportunity to give the player narrative clues that would further enhance the story. Unfortunately, none of these two segments reached the level of work that I wanted, as I focused on other things. I should also mention that by this time in the blockout stage, I realized that I wanted more verticality in the level. However, I had worked from references of primarily Paris, which is a flat city, and got fixed with the idea of boulevards and wide streets. Verticality in the level was meant to come in the ascension of the rooftops. In hindsight, I feel this was a mistake, however, and I now wish that I would have included a more Gotham-esque verticality in the original design. A military parade can be seen marching through the city streets. The player is closing in on the palace and believes that the end is drawing near. The final segment of the second act is at hand, a rooftop challenge. I recommend reading and watching the narrative section further down that explains who the enemy are and why the player should care. A cutscene is also featured that would be played previous to this encounter. The enemy has been alerted of the player character's presence and has heightened their awareness. It is my intent to break the concept of safety atop the rooftops by introducing these airships. Tension rises further as the player is now challenged even on top of the rooftops. If the player is detected by the searchlights, an alarm would sound and the player would be shot down, i.e. game over. The player must now use both agility and thought as this segment combines both stealth and puzzle. One thing that was on the drawing board but was ultimately cut due to lack of time was the sewer system. According to the world building, the nation is a warrior nation. Therefore, the city lies on top of a massive interconnected bunker-like sewer system where the undesirable people of the city have created a society of their own. The existence of the sewers has been foreshadowed by the sewer drains placed throughout the level, as well as via dialogue between the player character and her companion. By this time, however, the player would perhaps have forgotten the dialogue, but will soon be reminded again of both the existence and danger of the sewers. Earlier, the player character would ask if not the sewers is an optional route for the company to take to pass unnoticed through the city. This is again re-evaluated as the enemy surrounds the player. Suddenly, the player is detected. Another cutscene is featured that shows the enemy closing in and attacking. The whole area is ruthlessly bombarded by the enemy and much destruction would follow. Upon entering the sewers, the level would then continue. In a dramatic turn of events, the player is forced down and left with no other option than entering the sewers. Thank you for your interest in this work and have a nice day.